Hi everyone, my name is Christof. Today I would like to talk about schema coaching for parents. And in this first part of the tutorial, we'd like to talk about the definition and the indication, the individual steps, and we talk about the schemas, this time from the therapists. If you don't know me, you find some information here on this slide, so you're free to stop the video. And otherwise, I just start with the basic idea within the schema coaching for parents. As you maybe know from schema therapy in general, the main concepts are that of emotional needs, of the schemas, of course. We have the coping modes and we have the mode model. And these are 4 pillars which are summarized under the roof of the schema therapy. But these pillars needs a good fundament. So that is here manned with an open and positive relationship to the parent. So altogether is conceptually building this house of schema coaching for parents. So what does it mean actually to talk about schemas with parents? So a definition we use is that it is a form of educational counseling. So first we have to teach the parents about our ideas. And when we do that, we talk a lot about the basic needs, the modes and the schemas, but not of the children, not of the teenager, but this time of the parents. So the child and teenager is as it is. We talk about what can you do as a mother or father or caregiver when you are confronted with difficult behavior. And the experience is that when we deepen the understanding, then it is much easier for the children, for the teenager, but this time also for the parents, to find good ways, to find functional ways. And the point is that a parent is supposed to learn to understand what is behind the problematic behavior of the children. So the story is, what are the needs behind the symptom? And that is not easy, and also for parents, how supposed to know that. We are looking for the needs and not only looking for the problematic behavior. But that is something we have to teach them actually in a very friendly, respectful way. So, when do parents need schema coaching? Well, our experience is that the parent training in different forms are quite good actually, so parents feel well. But we often find parents who cannot profit from these trainings because they seem to have an emotional problem with what they have learned. So the training is something different from the life at home, and what we often find is an emotional resistance within the parent. So for example, limit setting, that the parent would say, yes, I know I'm supposed to set limits, but I cannot do that. I cannot stand to see my child crying or something like that. So that is not a cognitive issue, it is an emotional problem. And an emotional problem needs emotional techniques. And that is the point here, that we are not only counseling or trying to convince them to do this and leave that, we are actually open or inviting them to talk about their own emotions. And what we often find is an inner conflict within the parent. A conflict or a high vulnerability in the parent, that is also possible, that it is really, really difficult for them to deal with problematic behavior. Can be also a tendency to punitive parenting, that of course we want to offer alternative ways how to deal with that. So not to encouraging them to proceed with the punitive or critic behavior. And we also have to do with conflicting attitudes of parents when they are in conflict with the child. However, we need to be careful when parents are already emotionally overloaded. For example, they have a mental ill health issue by themselves. That is a problem, and we wouldn't further burden the parents. So we will only would support them and try to convince them that they will take care of themselves and looking for a therapist by their own. Of course, we also talk about to them and do it in a more cognitive way, but we are not opening all these emotional issues with them when it is clear that they have a, for example, borderline or depressive disorder. So, central to schema coaching for parents is the understanding of schemas' impact on feelings, thoughts, and behavior. So, bad behavior or bad feelings or thoughts do not fall from the sky, but they are often triggered by patterns, by emotional patterns, which we call schemas. And the goal is to give the parents an insight into what kind of schemas and modes they have developed. So that is actually quite exciting for them, because we are always looking on the children and try to help them. But in this phase of the therapy, on this part, we are explicitly trying to help the parents to overcome their emotional and their emotional issues, and that means also to get more knowledge about their maladaptive schemas and dysfunctional modes. So this insight helps the parents to act differently. So not based on old maladaptive schemas and modes, but rather helping the child to feel and act in a more helpful and appropriate way. So the children need their parents. In order they have to learn how to deal with painful points or emotional wounds. In order to free oneself from maladaptive schemas, it is first necessary to recognize and accept that intrinsic schemas are present, even when they may have been hidden or covered. So we need a certain openness, but how we get this openness, I will talk about later. Our experience is, if the parent and the child share the same maladaptive schemas and dysfunctional modes, and if they are triggered, they are even more difficult to deal with. So they can make it worse, actually. And if we only treat the child, it is obviously that when the child is at home and the parents are triggered, that the whole process goes on, and children are prone to develop their schemas on their own. So the individual steps of schema coaching for parents are to clarify which modes exist in the parent and how they are triggered through the child's behavior. So we talk about the emotional buttons or sore spots, pain points with another metaphor, and that is what the parents usually can agree with, that they of course have emotional buttons where they are really struggling and emotionally very activated. And possibly to go back into their own childhood in order to clarify which needs were not met in the parent's childhood. So that is a very special and important point that we try to guide the parents, the grown-up parents, into their own childhood and discover how did you feel, which needs were met or not met in your childhood. And possibly we consider what kind of childhood their own parents had, so we can go back through the generations. And in a later video I will show you the house of generations, where we try to understand at which generation are which schemas, and it is obviously that the schemas are transported from generation to generation. I will talk about that in a different video later on. So, what we do is we try to sketch the schema genogram over 3 generations. So we get an overview, what kind of schemas were prevalent in this type of generation. And again, if a parent is suffering from mental disorder, it is necessary for them to seek a psychotherapist on their own. But we can help them. We're supposed to help them to find one. And if they find or if they start a psychotherapy or not, usually the psychotherapists for adults do not necessarily talk about the problems with upbringing issues. So nevertheless, we need to accompany, we need to support them during the process of where we're treating the children. So we do not stop our contact to the parents. We simply do not activate them emotionally because we think this burden or these emotional issues need to be treated by the adult schema therapist or psychotherapist in general. When we do that, we have to take care because we are part of actually the system where we start now, and schema coaches or therapists of course have to be very careful and usually honor the efforts of the parents. So I will show you later how we do that. And this is really important, that we are not going straight to the pain points, but of course try to make them understand how wonderful and how great and how many things, positive things they did for their children. And schema therapists also lead parents to see and meet their own needs. So this is important that they also learn about their own needs and try to find a good and balanced way to satisfy and meet the needs of the children, but also of themselves. And schema coaches or therapists also share examples of their own lives if possible, so we call that selective self-disclosure. Why not talking about what problems, similar problems we maybe had, so that made the parent feel that he is not so inferior, or that the therapist or coach is not this great hero who can do anything, has never a problem. No, it is actually quite normal to have problems with children. We all do have that. And it would be quite honest and authentically if we really express that we understand that the parents are struggling in some way with their children. That is quite normal. So this is met with selective self-disclosure. So we are trying to really pick them up and emotionally understand them. On the other hand, we also need to confront them when parents show problematic behavior. For example, to show unjust or harsh punishment, and we try, according to the principle of empathic confrontation, empathically and effectively to set limits, but also to stop their violence, actually, and do not show any physical or emotional neglect to the children. And most of all, when we do schema coaching for parents, the therapists need to know their own wounds or emotional schemas. Because if he does not know his own schemas, he might get in a real problem, because the parent has possibly their schemas, the children are developing their schemas, and if the therapist enters the system with his own or her own schemas without knowing it, that leads to a big confusion, and we want to avoid that and also want to prepare therapists who are working with such difficult emotional issues that they are really firm and they know what are my emotional buttons and where I need to take care of myself. So what are my wounds? Very central issue. I come back to that. So what can we do to learn about our own schemas? In schema therapy, usually all schema therapists sooner or later will fill in a schema questionnaire, for example from Young. And I hope you once have, or maybe you have now, the opportunity to fill in this questionnaire and to get an idea which schemas might be prevalent in you as a therapist or as a counselor. And that is really very important to know more about ourselves, so we can use this formal way for what I would like to encourage you. And I would also like to propose another way how to deal with that. And this is an exercise I would like to suggest to do after the slides, and I will explain you how that works. So, imagine there are two people, a supervisor and a supervisee. So, now, in your case, there's one person who's experienced or is in the supervisor role, and the other one is a therapist. And the therapist describes an event from his day-to-day life where he was emotionally very upset, very much activated, more than usual, let's say. He was so much activated, he actually does not understand himself, or he would say this was just too much. I don't know what happened to me, why I was so activated. So, for example, I was very angry when somebody disappointed me. Of course, I know that people disappoint me, but why I was in this case so disappointed? So it has, for sure, a reason, and the reason is now something what we try to detect. So the schema coach here, or the therapist, would describe an event where he was very activated, and the supervisor is trying to work out what are your thoughts, what are your emotions, what does your body say to you, or body responses, and what would you have loved to do, or what kind of tendencies you felt in yourself. Okay, then we leave the situation, what activated this, and the supervisor works out the trigger for the intense response and explores a kind of bridge. So what kind of biographical reference we find. So we can do it in a cognitive way. So where do you know that feeling and thoughts and body response from? But we can also ask our belly, so our emotional system. And maybe it's good to close your eyes. To close your eyes when you imagine this triggering situation from what I've told you. And now leave the situation away, and now let come up any kind of situation from your past, childhood, or when you've been a teenager. And where does your emotions carry you to? So, for example, is it a birthday party, or is it a Christmas celebration, or what kind of meeting it was, and where do you know that feeling from? So what we're actually heading for is what are your wounds and where do they come from actually. So what comes in your mind when you stay at this specific emotion, cognition, body response, and tendency to do something. We also ask what kind of mode popped up in this situation. So what would you have loved to do? And we try to understand actually, to build a bridge between the here and now and the past. And we try to understand why was I in these days so upset when that happened, so how is that connected to my own experience, my own biography. And when we have that, you have figured out that, the supervisor in this exercise, you will try to understand the connection and how this strong emotional reaction is to explain, and how does that change alone by the fact that you built a bridge and tried to understand what was going on in you emotionally. So I hope I could understand it, I could explain it in a proper way, and you feel encouraged to do that. And that is now the point where you can go into the exercise. So please try to build groups of 2 people, 2 to 3 people, and go into a small exercise group and One is a supervisor, one is a supervisee, and you're talking about your day-to-day life as a therapist or maybe as a private person. And talk about a very emotional situation and try to figure out how is it connected to your childhood. So I wish you good luck and see you later. Bye bye.